Happy Friday and happy holidays. Welcome back to another episode of Bioactive Live Q&A. This is a special pre-recorded holiday edition where we're going to be sharing 3 videos with you guys that we put together as part of the Matt Powers Our Soil Conference. I'm your host, Mark, from MIBeneficials. One of those videos comes from me, and it's about IPM In Your Worm bin. That'll be video number 1. Video number 2 is coming from co-host Bryan at Rubber Ducky Isopods, and that is going to be a kind of an in-depth look at soil systems, understanding what healthy soil systems are, and understanding that there is a very clear and real parallel between a healthy soil system that supports a plant and a healthy soil system that supports an animal. The third video is coming from Kevin at Okcalyxx, and he's talking about doing natural farming your way, adapting principles to use the resources that you have available so that your inputs are cheap or free, and so that you're adapting to what it is that your climate offers. And I think that that's a really important principle for people to understand. So without further ado, let's jump right into video number 1, coming to you from myself, titled IPM In Your Worm bin. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to IPM from Your Worm bin. My name is Mark Ashworth. I'm the owner and founder of MIBeneficials, and I'm here today to talk with the Our Soil community about adapting your worm bin or building a new worm bin to have incorporated IPM protection in the soil and in the substrate. It's a really simple adaptation to your worm bins, and it's a really simple build for a new worm bin. The differences are going to be in the species that we're adding and in the food that we're feeding. So looking forward to this, and I'm very honored to be here today speaking at the Our Soil convention. Again, my name is Mark Ashworth. I own and operate MIBeneficials, and I'm the co-creator and host of Bioactive Live Q&A, which is a podcast on YouTube. More importantly, I'm a stay-home dad, proud father of a 3.5-year-old boy and a 4.5-year-old daughter, and I'm supported by an amazing wife who works really hard in a stressful job to support us and to provide for the family and to provide for me so that I can focus on the important things in life, like raising children. And the other important thing and passion in my life is regenerative farming. My connection with the soil started years ago with my connection in nature. As a remote fly fishing guide in Alaska, I found this overwhelming sense of connection with the river that I was fishing, with the trails that I was walking, with the plants that surrounded us, and the nature and the animals. And what I didn't realize until much later in life, having moved away from Alaska, out of the transient life, and a little less in the wilderness and connected that way, is that my connection came from the soil. I didn't find that connection again until I started regenerative farming, where I started to see the power of sustainability, and using and trusting nature, even when you're starting with a suburban area, and rehabilitating nature. It's a powerful a skill set to have. It's something that I've been working on and building on over the past several years. And having my children as a motivation to grow healthier food, and have healthier soil has really been my motivating factor in regenerative gardening. And before we jump into setting up an IPM system in your worm bin, I would love the opportunity to introduce you to my company, MIBeneficials, how we started and what we offer. So starting of MIBeneficials came back in 2021. Was when I launched the website MIBeneficials.com and really kind of put some wheels on this idea that I had been brewing for a couple of years at that point. And it really started with one product. It was just the biodiversity pack, which was a collection, or it still is a collection of soil-based beneficial organisms, specifically rove beetles or Delocia coriaria, Hypoaspis miles or Stratiolaelips cymatus, orbitid mites, springtails, potworms or Enchytriidae, and a lot of inert soil mites and beneficials in between that will lend themselves to a healthy nutrient cycle, as well as lending themselves to pest management. And so the company began with that one product, and the reason why it was such a success is I guess my marketing was pretty good on Instagram, and the product really solves an issue, and the issue is fungus gnats, especially when you're talking about no-till indoor, regenerative gardening practices, where you're going to have a lot of breaking down, decomposing material, a lot of food and space for fungus gnats to proliferate. And when you're not utilizing a sterile soil environment like in cocoa or soilless media, it can become an issue. So the knee jerk is to go ahead and start spraying products, and that's kind of where my journey began, was chasing my tail, seeing my plants really suffer by spraying, caustic things into the soil and effectively killing my microorganisms. So when I started dabbling with rove beetles in conjunction with Hypoaspis miles, which were readily available at the time across multiple different sites from different providers of biocontrols, and those two organisms together really did damage to the fungus gnats, really knocked them back effectively. So I knew immediately that there was something to that, and the only hurdle really to face was the cost thing, because when you're raising homogeneous, cultured, sterile kind of organisms in a scientific lab setting, it can be a lot more costly, especially when you have a lot of overhead. So these organisms are not cheap, which is why they're not really being broadcast as like the fix-all, because is it really worth $150 to fix your fungus gnats? And to a lot of people, it's not. But the other realization that I started coming to after using these organisms is that when I introduced them into my worm bin, I started to realize how regenerative they were. When I fed them a proper diet, and we'll get into that as well later, but when I started to feed them a proper diet, when I started to incorporate them with my red wigglers and my other composting worms, I started to realize that these things not only come back, but they build in populations based on how well you're running your vermicompost operation. So the regenerative aspect is really what got me excited about the biodiversity pack. That's really what got some legs on this business, where people started using it, started realizing how effective it was, started realizing, through, at the time, coaching, mentorship from myself, and also coming to these realizations on their own, that you can throw these into a worm bin and they'll keep proliferating. So yeah, the biodiversity pack, I believe it started at like $40 a pack, and now it's still at $40 a pack. So it's very reasonable to have an entry into these these beneficial arthropods now with this product, which is why it branched off into some other amazing things for me. They come in a 12-ounce food safe package. One of these packs goes for about 6 square feet of soil bed. And you can adjust that based on the level of issue that you're having. If you're having significant fungus gnat issues, you can always hit it harder with multiple packs. Just keeping in mind, obviously, that it's a time game, right? So if you hit it with more organisms fast, it's going to take relatively less time than hitting it with less organisms at first. So understanding that these organisms take time to reproduce, which is why we tell people 2 to 4 weeks is a good window for expecting to see some sort of results with fungus gnats specifically. And the reason for that 2 to 4 week window is because rove beetles take about 4 weeks to go through a full reproductive cycle. Hypoaspis miles take about 11 to 14 days, and these are in ideal conditions. So assuming the conditions are somewhat ideal, that 4-week period is when you really start to see the populations take off. And again, it's a numbers game. So if you've got more predators and more competition in the soil, you're going to have less room and less numbers of pests, specifically those fungus gnat larvae. And then, beyond just gnats, the thing that really has brought a good value to the product is that with our cocoa growers that were experiencing thrips and root aphids indoors, by putting these into those pots early on as a preventative, like right upon plant, you have an amazing level of prevention against thrips and root aphids. Flooding that zone early, ensuring that the thrips don't make their way from the soil up through the foliage and start, reproducing above where the prevention is, then you're pretty well protected. So that's always why having a preventative IPM program will save you money. It'll save you headache. It'll save you time. After launching the biodiversity pack and seeing the great response that it had, and kind of the need that there was in the home grow no-till world for fungus gnat control and for reasonably priced organic pest control, we started to branch out a little bit. It really gave us the confidence as a company, and myself as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, to start creating some other avenues and some other products, which is where we started branching into our dry amendments. We started carrying things like aloe and coconut powder at cheaper prices. At first, it definitely was about trying to offer reasonably priced products, but seeing that there is also money that can be made when there's no overhead, it really allows us to offer these products at a much cheaper value, because we don't have accountants, we don't have people answering the phones and people stocking shelves. So another way we expanded was we started to connect with other business owners in the community that had things that they were offering. And because this is kind of a niche group in regenerative agricultural, natural farming, organic gardening, no-till, whatever you want to call this thing, whether it's indoor or outdoor, it was a win-win to be able to connect with these business owners and be able to offer their products on our platform as well. And I think that we've really helped each other to grow. One of those guys that we connected with was Chris from Country Roots Organics, and he's got an amazing lineup of products that really align with what our values and goals are. The inputs that go into these products are foraged and farmed for the most part right off of his land or from the surrounding areas up north in Michigan. which is really resource dense. And for him to be able to bottle that up and share it with us, and for us to be able to share it with the country is really a gift. Those products are everything from FPJs to OHNs to water soluble calcium, horsetail, a lot of amazing products that we are able to offer because of their farm. And because we're a beneficial company, one thing that we always wanted to offer was spider mite control. It's definitely a necessity in the organic world, and it's something that we've learned a lot about over the last 3 years in working with a company out of California called Biotactics. Andrew, who's the owner, they have a proprietary rearing system using smaller cultures and using actual spider mite eggs to feed their predatory mites. And when you use actual spider mite eggs, you get much better results out of the predators that you're rearing. And what I also learned is that the industry, as a standard, rears these predatory mites like Californicus, Phalaensis, and Occidentalis. Those are generally raised on slow-moving soil-based grain mites. So over generations and generations of rearing these predatory mites, they've effectively been able to slow these species down, so to speak, as opposed to rearing them generations and generations on their natural food diet. They're rearing them on slow-moving couch potato almost diet. So what ends up happening generation over generation is the predatory mites get lazy and they lose their natural instinct and ability to hunt and to take down spider mites. So knowing your source and knowing how they're reared is the most important thing to understanding biocontrols, because if you're not getting the right biocontrols, you need either a lot more, they won't work, or you just aren't going to get the results that you're looking for. And when you go with the mites that we offer that are reared right out of California and shipped from California as opposed to overseas out of Europe, you really are getting the best quality product. And that was the holdup for us in offering these, is that we aren't going to be rearing them, so we can't really maintain that level of quality that we've been able to maintain with every other product going out the door, including our biodiversity packs. So it was a big point of concern, but after doing hundreds of orders with them, we've had nothing but great success, and the few small hiccups with them have really been nothing but hiccups. So really an amazing branch that we were able to take, and having Andrew as a business partner and as a friend, and being able to ask him these questions and to get good information out of him has really been amazing, because this is another industry, the predatory mite industry or the biocontrols, where transparency is not necessarily at the forefront, and ambiguity is what they thrive on. So getting direct answers is amazing. And as we evolved as a company, we also evolved in kind of the offerings that we have. And so branching out it in parallel to agriculture and in parallel to growing living soil indoors is the entire what they call the bioactive enclosure world, or terrariums, vivariums, bioactive reptile enclosures. And what that is essentially is trying to mimic nature for your reptile, whether it's warm, cold, dry, moist condition, building an environment that's in a glassed enclosure and in a controlled environment that closely mimics their native environment. And that also includes having a very bioactive soil base And the reason they want that bioactive soil base is because when their reptiles defecate and when there's waste coming out of from that reptile, something needs to clean it up. And so when you have things like springtails, isopods, mites, all the same decomposers that you have in living soil beds or in healthy soils, you have those in these bioactive enclosures as well. So this is where we branched off into offering some colored and exotic members of the cleanup crew, as they call it in Bioactive. And so we've slowly and methodically been adding different colored springtails to our offering. This is just one of the many springtails that we have. We have over 15 species, red, orange, yellow, blue, purple. Truly amazing to see the vibrancy that exists in nature. And then having reared these now for several years and seeing how they decompose, how they integrate with one another, and what their food sources are, just getting to know the nuances of raising these things, I'm starting to understand that they do certainly have a place in agriculture, in your living soil beds, because each species eats different food sources and prefers different things. So while you'll have the reds and the oranges will be protein heavy eaters, you'll have other organisms like the blues, the yellows, the whites. They'll be focused more on all the other detritus that's breaking down, and even the waste coming off of these protein heavy movers. And so they fill in the cracks between one another. In conjunction, they work great. Separately, they're beautiful for people that want to see them just kind of in an isolated culture. And it's truly amazing to see decomposition, which is nature showing its way. When you can see that with a colorful array of springtails, it truly is a cool little flair to the soil. So another amazing thing, found a lot of passion raising these things, getting to know them, and offering them to the world, or to the country, I should say. All right, so that's kind of MIBeneficials, what we offer, who we are. So what kind of pest control, or what kind of IPM can come from your soil? Well, it's important to understand that a lot of pests for your plants indoors do start in the soil. They're generally not going to be flying from one leaf to the next, and they also aren't going to find a very great place to overwinter in foliage. So when you consider that the soil is a place where not only fungus gnats, not only root aphids, but the larval stages of thrips, as well as the eggs of spider mites, get dropped in the soil. So when you're trying to control foliar-based pests without any sort of control coming from the soil, you can miss things. And so that ends up forcing people to have to do root drenches, which again is going to counteract what we're looking for as far as life and microbial concentration. So having that base level in the soil not only is going to stop intruders from coming in, but it's going to also nip them off when they get dropped into the soil. So if you do have an issue, you put them in, you have the soil-based predators and the soil-based beneficials that are waging war. It's going to help you in controlling that foliar-based attack. So you're going to get predation from species like rove beetles, Hypoaspis miles. Those have been shown to control fungus gnats effectively, and they have been shown to prevent, in conjunction, to prevent species like root aphids and thrips. And then you're also going to have competition coming from the springtails, the orbitid mites, the potworms, the nematodes, all of the things you can't see, like the protozoa and the bacteria. You want this healthy competition because you want them filling the void that otherwise would be a home for the pathogens and the negative pests. So consider all that competition that you see. As much as it might freak you out to see a huge bloom of springtails, just remember that they're not there to eat your plant. They're there to eat breaking down material. So they're there to compete. And if they can eat the stuff before the pests can make a home in the detritus, then it really helps everybody and it lends itself to pest management. So this is what a worm bin for IPM looks like for me. Worm bins, if you do a Google search, you'll find 100 different types, stackable ones with spigots on the bottom for the slurry. We don't really mess with any of that. We just have these standalone bins, 1 or 2 holes in the top. You can put mesh over the hole. I've done that. I have them that look like that. I like them with the holes off for moisture control. There's really only a couple of things that you need to worry about in a worm bin, and that is overfeeding and getting too wet. So having control on that moisture is important, which is why those holes are big. That's why they're not covered. And so we're going with a 15 to 30 quart flat Tupperware. We don't put holes in the base. We don't put holes in the bottom for drain off or anything like that, as I stated. And then if you're looking for kind of a starting recipe, I like to go with a soil substrate as opposed to the paper shreds and just food. If you're going for just worm castings, I understand why you're going for that. If you're going for an IPM bin like what we're talking about here, this might be something to consider because your beneficial soil organisms are going to be spatially aware, and they're also going to reproduce and expand based on how much space they have. So just like the worms, they won't get too big for the volume that they're in. These guys won't either. So just remember that. So if you start with a tiny little layer of substrate, you're going to end up with a tiny little amount, relatively speaking, of organisms. So I like to go, I like to fill it up like, a half to 3/4 of the way full of that container right there. I'll go with 50% cocoa core and 50% worm castings. Ideally, they're fresh, microbial, active, ready to go on top of a plant worm castings, not dried out. If they aren't, that's okay too, because you're going to be incorporating red wigglers, Eisenia fetida. You can also incorporate other composting worms. Some people love having a consortia of those composting worms, and that's fine. I love it all. For this, we'll keep it simple. So you got your red wigglers. You're going to incorporate hypoaspis miles and rove beetles, and those are available at places online. You can just do a quick Google search on those. Which is where our biodiversity product kind of came in, and where it can solve both of those at once for you. It has both those species. So just some options, but incorporate those into the bin, and that's should be a one-time buy. It is something that you really should source unless you've got some source elsewhere. But they are a specific species of rove beetles. So if you're finding rove beetles outside, I don't know that I would necessarily trust that they're going to be Delocia coriaria or Staphylioni, but just something to consider, something that I would just purchase up front so that you never have to worry about that. And then what we're going to do as far as feeding goes is we're going to alternate feedings. We're going to go with fruit scraps like you normally would in your worm bin. And then I like to incorporate something that's going to be a little more enzyme protein rich, like barley, lentil, corn, oats, wheat bran, stuff like that will blow up with fungal activity. For whatever reason, these predatory species love that, as do the decomposers. So I like to incorporate that feed, every other feed, with my bins. So when we're talking about maintaining the optimal conditions in that IPM bin, it's going to be very similar to a worm bin. Um, your temperature range, the ideal temperatures are going to be somewhere in the 68 to 75 range. If you can't maintain that, or you're in a basement like we are, you can always go with heating mats that will keep that soil at a more optimal temperature. Just make sure you get one that you can adjust to a low setting, because you don't want to cook your bins either. So maintaining that temperature is ideal. And then as far as a moisture, kind of like where your moisture level needs to be in the IPM bin, we like to start with a good baseline moisture. So we're not putting like bone dry substrate in. We're pre-moistening everything to get it to where it's you can squeeze it with your hand. It'll clump together nicely, but it's not wringing out like a sponge. um, Kind of with mixing the cocoa and the worm castings. The worm castings, when they're fresh, they're generally moist, and the cocoa is generally dry. So if you pre-moisten that cocoa block or cocoa core, mix it with the worm castings, you'll be at pretty much an optimal moisture setting there. And then we like to work on establishing a moisture gradient. So that means setting a wet side of the bin and a dry side of the bin. So the wet side usually translates to the side that you're going to be feeding on, and I like to alternate sides, so that when I feed on the quote unquote wet side, the moisture from any of the fruit or food scraps that I'm putting in is going to stay in that area, and I'm allowing the other side of the bin to dry out. And so sometimes I won't be feeding more than once every 2 weeks, so that wet side will start drying out. It'll start kind of reacclimating itself back to kind of the normal. And then when I go to feed again, I'm switching sides to the dry side. At that point, I'm going to the other side of the bin, making that the wet side, letting it set for a couple weeks or as long as the food lasts, and then kind of rinsing and repeating that. So it's a good way to keep a moisture gradient, so you've always got a wet side, and B, keep everything moving back and forth in the bin so that they're using all the real estate. And then one of the bigger things that you need to avoid is overfeeding. So if you're doing a big feeding of anything, I would highly recommend checking before feeding more. What I mean by checking is literally getting your hands dirty in the bin, seeing if there's still food scraps there, seeing if there's still those grains from the Benny Boost or that type of material in there, and making sure that it's broken down before you feed anymore. That's going to be a good way to avoid getting any sort of issues. Over watering is going to be your biggest, and that can end up killing off worms and other organisms. So just avoiding that, and then feeding too much and putting grains with fruit scraps. The reason I say alternating those things is that if you put them together, they're going to go hot. So, and when it goes hot, it kills off worms. You don't want that in your bin. That's also why I like to keep my food on one side of the bin. So if things do go bad there, they have a whole other side of the bin to kind of escape to if they need to. But again, just trying to avoid overfeeding. So we do recommend, after you set up the bin, to leave it sit for a period of time, so that you can allow these predatory species to reproduce. And you want everything really to reproduce: springtails, all your decomposers, to grow in numbers, so that when you start harvesting, they're going to have filled all the voids in the bin. So we're not going to be over harvesting. We're just going to be harvesting what we need, and leaving the rest. So by allowing everybody to fill all the nooks and crannies of the bin, which generally will take a couple months, That will ensure that you have a really good kind of starting inoculation on the hole in that bin. The last thing we want to do is to over harvest our bin, and it can really significantly impact the longevity of the bin. You can actively wipe out species if you over harvest. So keep that in mind. Now, we talked earlier about kind of like having a worm bin for vermicompost, for worm castings. This is more of like we're talking about an IPM bin. So you're going to be getting some of the benefits of the worm castings with the quote unquote IPM castings, but where we're harvesting them from in a bin like this is going to be different location. So we like that, 4 or 5 inches of substrate, so that we're able to, if we want to harvest the IPM castings, that's going to be where your predatory species are going to be hanging out most. That's that top 2 inches, that rhizosphere, quote unquote. That's where these species like to hang out. So harvesting that top 2 inches is where you're going to get a good concentration of those species, and harvesting in spaces like where you've fed. So on the feed side, on the wet side, that's where you're going to find a big concentration of beneficial that are going to be actively hunting. You're also going to find a bunch of larval stages, pupal stages, because that's where they're actively hunting for food. So understanding that your strong IPM castings are coming from the top of the bin. And then if you're looking for actual worm castings, because we do have worms in these bins, those worm castings generally are going to be down below those feed zones. So that's where you're going to get like your compaction of nice, thick worm kind of casting that just packs itself down. So periodically, usually going to take a little bit longer, even than a couple months. I would give it longer than that, but you can certainly go down and on the side that you're not feeding on that week or 2 week period. That's the side that you're going to harvest from, because that's where the worms are going to all have moved to the feed side. You don't necessarily want to harvest those worms out of this bin. You want to keep those populations flourishing as well. And I mentioned before that we don't want to over harvest our beneficial organisms. And we also don't want to over harvest the substrate. So if we're going for worm castings, and also when you're harvesting for IPM castings, you're still taking volume away from the soil, from the bin. So make sure that you replace it periodically so that you don't go down to a volume that will be detrimental to growing populations. I want to thank Matt Powers for setting up this amazing event. 5 days of free information is definitely a gift to this community, and a huge thank you to Matt and Our Soil. Thank you to everybody for listening. And if you want to support us, you can visit us at MIBeneficials.com. And you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at MIBeneficials, where you'll find our podcast, Bioactive Live Q&A. Join us any Friday night at 9 p.m. live on YouTube. And I hope you all have great success setting up your first IPM bin. Have a great day. All right, next up is a video from Bryan at Rubber Ducky Isopods, who is truly a pioneer in soil systems, I guess would be the best way to put it, and applying living soil systems from agriculture into the reptile world and into the terrarium vivarium space, where the goal is rearing, a healthy reptile, rearing a healthy animal on living soil, and using the living soil in different ways, not only growing plants, but utilizing it as a home for your cleanup crew that will be doing all the heavy lifting, the cleaning up of the waste material, the the detritus, the excrement, whatever you want to call it, coming off of those reptiles. And when you start to understand how robust that soil system can be inside of a living enclosure for your reptile, just like with your plant, you start to realize that there's going to be less smells. There's going to be almost no smells. Um, there's going to be these profound realizations that your animal's healthier. It's living more in tune with the way that it was supposed to. So I hope that you guys gather from this next video that there is a very real parallel in living soil systems when we're trying to replicate nature between growing plants and growing animals. And I think that Bryan is a very cool example of that. Enjoy.
What is up, Dirt Dorks? Happy Thursday to you. My name is Bryan Waxman. I am the co-owner of Rubber Ducky Isopods, and I am excited to be a part of the first annual Our Soil Conference. You know, at the beginning of this year, Matt Powers asked me to be a part of the Our Future Conference, and as I'm excited to kind of start to begin to share with some of the ways that I think people in the cannabis space that maybe lost their way or maybe it just never worked out for them. You know, how are they able to find success when maybe the cannabis aspect just passed them by? I know it passed me by. So how are you able to kind of pick yourself up, find a new way to do that? In my opinion, it's understanding soil systems and moving forward with this, understanding soil systems with what's known as mycorrhizal fungi. So this is going to be a fun talk for me today, and I'm excited for everybody that's involved on Thursday. There's a lot of bright-minded people that you guys have seen, all of us kind of learn from one another and continue to improve on things and just kind of build a community that started on the internet and now is starting to be more of a national thing. So like I had mentioned, I was part in January with Our Future. This is kind of like that 1.0. This would be 2.0 for my talk. But the 1.0 version was overcoming adversity with bioactive entrepreneurship. And the reality is that just kind of building soil systems, understanding from Dr. Lane Ingham how to improve things and understand that trusting this process, things are going to improve week after week, month after month, year after year, kind of taking that to the next level. You know, I'm paying it forward, passing it on about Jeff Lowenfels and his books and that kind of stuff. So if you're very new to this or brand new to this, I would check out the early videos at the beginning of this year. And that moves us into, you know, when I was talking about those things, it was very hard for a lot of us to find success to grow cannabis without any deficiencies whatsoever. So this photo that you guys see here, this was kind of like our first time, especially for me, that I was able to grow anything without any deficiencies whatsoever, trusting the process, trusting in Mother Nature. We weren't even using a cover crop at that time, but we were finding success using Mother Nature and starting to build these soil systems. And as time progressed, our skill sets progressed, and we were able to multiply these skill sets so that we had more and more plants. And each one of those plants have their own soil systems, and we call that the stomach of the soil system. And so if we can get all of those to become alive and thriving, well, our job will get easier and easier as time goes by. The reality is that they kind of all start at the beginning. Some of them kind of take off, some of them don't. That's why you'll hear me in the version 1.0 talk about when you're first setting up anything with the soil system. I like to set up a worm farm. Even if I know I'm 3 months out, 6 months out, a year from now, I'm setting up that worm bin from day one so that my sluggish plants, like you see in this photo, if I see anything that's just not doing what it's supposed to, then I'm able to add diversity at that time, by that time, as we've said over the years, from my worm bin so that there are no deficiencies in veg or even late into flower. So using these plants, using cover crops, finding a symbiotic relationship, we're able to understand more about the cannabis plant and Mother Nature as a whole. That she's growing as an autotrophic. And in this infographic, you can see that she's able to feed herself. So if we're a cannabis farmer or a designer isopod breeder, and we're focusing on feeding the soil and not the plant or not the cover crop for the isopod version, then we know that these soil systems, our goal is to build the diversity within that. And so it's a fantastic photo I have on the right-hand side. This is in a commercial setting in Oklahoma where we're pheno hunting, and we're able to pheno hunt from day one without any deficiencies. So you can start and kind of see the plants as they grow and see them for hopefully the full genetic profile that you're trying to achieve while you're running these expensive pheno hunts. And so all of that was talked about in the first talk. I'm now kind of continuing that for my 2.0. This talk for the Our Soil Conference is called Beneath the Cap, a Decade of Fungal Insights. And this is me just kind of sharing with you guys how I was able to pick myself up by my own bootstraps, educate myself a little bit, take a few courses, read a few books, and as the years have gone by, find my own way. And so I'm excited to share all of that with you guys today. So again, if you start out with something solid, there's so many people now with information. It's almost like information overload. How do you know which lane to kind of pick to go down, which rabbit hole? In my opinion, there's a nice blueprint here with Teaming with Microbes. Again, that's from Jeff Lowenfels. If you're brand new to this or you've never heard of that book, then I encourage you guys to check him out. I had mentioned it before. I've mentioned it on the podcast, almost it seemed like every week there for a while, about how this is kind of the main blueprint for you understanding some of this stuff that is possible and what can be achieved, and maybe gaining some confidence by reading this book so that you can trust the process. He has Teaming with Nutrients and also Teaming with Fungi when he was known as the Lord of the Roots. If you're brand new to this, I would kind of keep it there, but he's the one that's, especially in the early days, was up on stage at Indo Expo and some of these bigger national cannabis expos around the country. And he was talking about how cannabis is more than just NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And what about all of these different trace minerals? And he was joking about how you could add, urea by peeing on your plants. And I found it very refreshing to have Jeff Lowenfels on stage teaching a bunch of stoners how to grow cannabis, because it wasn't dry and dull. It wasn't PhD style where everybody's using words that you've never heard of. And so a lot of this stuff started to resonate with me personally, thinking about the plant soil system as a stomach. If you're able to build that up, you can add composting worms and springtails and isopods, and that life becomes almost kind of like the intestines of that microbial world, and that's how things are improving over time. It just kind of gave me that aha moment listening to Jeff Lowenfels after I had taken Dr. Lane Ingham's online course. And so taking it forward from there, I was asked from Denver Normal here in Denver, Colorado, to give a talk in 2016 about even the same infographic that I just showed you guys, about how it's possible to actually grow medicine. At that time, I had even been growing for fairly recently a cannabis commercial facility that had been busted for growing with Eagle 20. And that's kind of what's kicked off my crusade, is the sneakiness and the shadiness of the head grower from the rest of the crew, and how nobody wanted to share anything back then, and nobody really knew late night what was going on when you were just kind of like a trimmer or somebody that was barely on the totem pole at the higher end. So what was going behind the scenes was that a lot of this medical marijuana, or so-called medical marijuana as they called it in Colorado, was anything but. And there was Eagle 20, there was Avid, there was Forbid. A lot of these things in the early days were being sprayed late into flower. And so I got involved even with Denver Normal for a while about how cannabis really is medicine. And I've used it for a long, long time on how to be able to sit down and even prepare for this presentation. It just allows me to relax, calms my mind a little bit, so that I can sit here and have a fantastic dialogue with you guys on a Thursday. So I think cannabis truly is medicine, and there's something special to Again, with Jeff, he's always trying to, I think, allow the layman to understand a pretty complex world with maybe an hour talk. And so he always had mentioned as well that there's more in a tablespoon of living soil. There's more life in that living tablespoon of living soil than there are people on this planet. And so that gives us a kind of a look and an insight into what's really going on. And that's what I mean when I say there's worlds upon worlds upon worlds. I would say that the soil scientific community is just barely starting to understand all of the nuances and symbiotic relationships that it seems like a lot of the beneficial aspects of soil, they all want to work together in that harmony, and they push out other things that become a problem or don't necessarily give back. So there's a whole little world that we're managing when we're building these soil systems. This picture again is special to me. This lady is named Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick. She was going around the country and educating a lot of people about soil and soil sciences, and she was a PhD type individual, and she created something called the microbiometer. So just shout out to her, shout out to everybody that you see on that panel. There's some pretty cool names up on that that we're talking back in the days. And there's something special, I think, to the Indo Expo. Unfortunately, that gentleman passed away. Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick passed away. But kind of giving you guys a look into the early time capsule of what it took to now get here, where internet is kind of king, especially after COVID. You don't necessarily have to spend thousands of dollars to be able to listen to a bunch of bright-minded individuals like you are today. There's just so many benefits to some of the negative things that came through on 2020. So always giving credit where credit's due. And Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick was definitely one of those that started to give me the confidence so that I could run down and find my own path and become an entrepreneur as well. So Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick, she created something called the microbiometer. This thing's kind of cool. It's there's earlier things and earlier versions of it, and it's progressed as she's passed away, and I think it's still a cool little product for the home grower. So if you guys want to check that out, I played around with it when Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick came to Indo Expo here in Denver. This was my score. It was a 1755. At that time, nobody had really been hitting those kind of numbers. And so I was excited to be kind of given the validation from someone like her of that whatever I was doing with the living soil and trying to build up organic matter and have a higher and higher level of humus, there was something special to that. And so here was this little microbiometer in a box that you could use. This picture is another fun one for me. These people, if you're into soil, especially in the early days, these people are your heroes. These are the soil scientists, especially Jeff, that was willing to get up on stage and talk to a cannabis audience before it was mainstream, before, especially in some of the other states, before it was even kind of not frowned upon. So just pioneers in the industry. I think you guys need to go back and kind of start from there if you're brand new to this, because it is something special to have that foundation, that blueprint, so that you are able to find success, early success, have a perpetual harvest, put a little money into your pocket, have a little extra time, read those books, and continue down the process of getting better, just like your soil systems, week after week, month after month, year after year. And here I am just kind of, I remember taking this picture thinking like, all right, I think I'm onto something. I think that my peer group that is growing synthetically, I might be able to find an upper hand. So I was able to have Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick take that soil sample as you see in there, and then have Mr. Lowenfeld sign my book. So when it comes to the isopod world, especially when it comes to soil systems, even in the early days when it came to cannabis, overwatering was a huge issue. The reality is now, I would think for most cannabis people, they're using more fabric pots than plastic pots. A living soil system is a little bit more forgiving, especially if you already have kind of a cover crop going. But if everything is brand new, then the perpetual propensity to make mistakes is there because everything is so brand new and you are brand new, so overwatering occurs. And I wanted to share this photo, this kind of setup I'm starting to see all over the internet, especially on Reddit. How do I take care of my isopods? Just give them some fish flakes, put some sphagnum moss down, maybe some cocoa fiber, make sure that you wet it, and then they're calling that a soil or a bioactive soil. And so I wanted to kind of point out that, in my opinion, that is anything but a soil system. Just having simple ingredients doesn't make anything alive and thriving. And the reason why so many people are finding pest issues and pest problems with breeding certain isopods is because the soil systems or lack of a soil system is too wet. And so that brings in the fungus gnats. You're adding these very low quality food systems like fish flakes like you see in the photo. And that's causing a lot of the fungus gnats, thrips, whiteflies to come and start to make basically a huge havoc for the average isopod breeder. And so when we're thinking about a bioactive setup, whether we're building it for cannabis or building it for isopods, we need to be so proactive that we're also thinking about, well, what happens when probably inevitably, especially if you're newer to this, the fungus gnat cycles come through. Well, that's where we want to make sure that we are more using like a vermicompost and building up an actual soil system than just mixing a couple ingredients, putting it in a plastic tub, over watering it, adding some fish flakes, and wondering why we're not finding success. The early days of trying to understand what builds a soil system, there was so much misinformation, I think, in those days as well. But we were running around, we were using oats, so organic oats. Then we would use what's known as the avocado tech. So we would cut when the avocado would go bad, you would cut it X like a baked potato, pop open that avocado, stick it down into that soil system, and then usually took about a week to 2 weeks, depending on how alive and thriving that soil system was. But you would get all the composting worms to come up, and composting worms are hermaphrodites. So as soon as they touch each other, they want to reproduce. And when they are reproducing, there's a lot of extra of that biofilm that you feel when you touch a composting worm. So as they're starting to reproduce and take hold, also you're having the springtails come into the avocado. You're having the rove beetles, and now I'm even using isopods with this same kind of technique. I've also noticed, to take it to the next level, when I started drizzling the kefir on top of, there's 3 avocados in there, even though you can just see the one. But when I would drizzle the kefir on there, within just an hour or so, it would harden up. And once it hardened up, I noticed that if I was to maybe leave it for 24 hours, 48 hours, and then chose to peel some of it up, that I would see rove beetles and springtails everywhere. And so I knew I was onto something about being able to continue to build these soil systems for literally pennies on the dollars by, using basic things that you can get from a grocery store. So I encourage you guys to play around, especially in the early days when you're building up your worm bins. Feed the family some organic avocados, and then take those shells and put them into your worm bins and break them down. There's so much success that you can find by just playing around with these simple ingredients, and then growing that organic cover crop. Again, not only are you building up the life with all of these kind of techniques, but you're pumping in those exudates into this soil system so that everything starts to take off. Little photo for me. I've used this over the years, even in the early days, to try to explain to people why cover crop is so important, why having runoff and having expensive, especially if you're farming synthetically, even having all of your expensive synthetic nutrients run off, not being able to get the full impact of things, and then eventually on the right hand side, even using a lot of that stuff, what ends up happening, because there is no life, is that it becomes compacted. And then over time, if you're not really paying attention, it becomes anaerobic. So it starts to stink. And then if you continue to let it go down that road, it becomes putrid. And I've actually seen a lot of growers that have made mistakes where their soil becomes so compacted that it stinks. And a living soil should never be that way. It should smell earthy. It should be inviting to you. And so when you're growing on more of the left-hand side of this photo with a bioactive setup where you're using a cover crop, you can even use a variety of different cover crops. There's blends out there. This one just has like a simple grass. You can chop and drop that grass so that it continues to feed that system on the left. And you'll notice that the water that's underneath that soil system is completely clean. There's no runoff. That is how Mother Nature continues to cycle and take care of herself. So if you're able to understand these systems and then put them in a microcosm scale of building up either a tent grow, a basement grow, or an isopod business, all of these things allow you to just have a healthier and healthier system. And that is not necessarily the norm in bioactive isopod setups right now. The majority of people believe that you have to break those down and you have to put them in new bins every so often. And there's no way to allow isopods to be in the same soil system from years on end. And I can personally tell you from my own experience that that's not true. I have a lot of bins that are over 3 years now. So just replicating fall, using chop and drops, that's how you're able to find success. So this is another way, just because someone has a fantastic product, is able to build up a fantastic following on social media and things. I sometimes see, myself included, that's why I put it up here, where people skimp on some of the things that in hindsight now, that's why I really want you guys to see this is a huge mistake. My wife and I had this created on something called Fiverr. I think it was $10, and it's worth every penny, right? Because it's you can barely see it. It's out of focus. It's hazy. Why would anybody even want to trust me to buy isopods because of the way that this logo looks? And I see that to this day, even with cannabis breeders and some of the people in the reptile space. They're so focused on so many different things that they forget that when you're showing up with your brand, if the brand, the logo, and your table or your website or wherever the person's at to see your brand, if it doesn't match quality, if you're trying to sell quality and this is what my logo looks like, then it doesn't connect with the consumer. And I see a lot of disconnect with people in the soil spaces as well, where they just skimp on these very basic branding and marketing things. So in the early days, try to figure it out. But then once things, you have a little extra money in your pocket, I personally then went and had a professional draw this by hand to make a logo. Doing it that way is not cheap. But at the same time, once it's created, now I can go, all of my efforts are being built where people see the same branding. And I was lucky enough to be able to name my company after the most famous isopod. So again, like search engine optimization, all of these things you need to think about if you're going to turn your soil exports and knowledge into some kind of entrepreneurship where you're able to monetize. You need to think about these things as you're building up these skill sets as well. The easier the name sometimes, the better. Like I didn't come up with Bryan's awesome bugs, right? It was something Rubber Ducky Isopods because I knew that the majority of the people would be using that in Google. So think about those things as well as you're building up your skill sets this week with the R Soil community. That just because you now have a product or you have a skill set, how do you get people to buy into what you're selling? And in my opinion, it's showing up with a logo. To me, this is showing up with a suit on. This is showing up with a t-shirt and jeans. And in my opinion, when you're trying to make a good impression, I'd rather be overdressed than underdressed. And then here it is again, right? Like, could you imagine if I had that first logo up on my banners and all my other stuff? So spending a little extra money with that, now I get to plaster that everywhere NASCAR style. So wherever I go, you best believe that people know that Rubber Ducky Isopods is in town, and organizing things, especially in the early days where we just stacked everything. I don't think enough people that are selling products in the cannabis space, whether they're selling seeds or they're selling their soil or their IMO, they really need to think about the presentation from the customer's standpoint. If you just have a basic table with a cloth over it and just a few products on there with no information, most people aren't going to initiate the conversation if they are confused about your products. And so allowing someone to see something where they can kind of feel confident enough to start that conversation is how I feel like my wife and I have been able to sell a little bit more than the competition, is because we're able to solve their problems. And when you're able to solve someone's problem, that's when they're handing out your business cards. A lot of people that have these reptiles, there's a huge level of resentment when they get them because the animals stink when they defecate, especially a bearded dragon, iguana, chameleons, that kind of thing. That's why Bioactive, even though it's so new to the space, people that understand it, geckos, people that understand that they don't have to necessarily feed their animal these crickets and these dubia roaches and some of the nastier insects. Isopods are a cleaner food source, and they can also feed them the composting worms as well. When the animal runs through the soil system and digs and that kind of thing, the isopods and springtails run, so the animal gets to hunt instead of being hand fed. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people that are understanding where I'm getting at. The reptile space, the microgreen space, people that are growing flowers for weddings. If you're able to get them just a little bit brighter, or the microgreens that have just a little bit more of a nutrient content for some of those higher end restaurants, you're going to be able to create a brand and a monetary niche for yourself. So with all of this, you just continue to improve, and eventually, I think anyone can find success by, if you've been growing cannabis, this is more for the people that have been doing it for a long time. If you've been growing cannabis and kind of barely getting by, but you do have the skill sets to grow your own stuff, find the connections. You've been doing that for years, just doing the whole process by yourself. Whether you know it or not, you have the skill sets to be an entrepreneur. And so now it becomes, instead of kind of more of the underground skill sets, now you need to find more of those legal skill sets. So we need to understand e-commerce. We need to take a few courses in search engine optimization so that people know where your website is. Because just because you built a website doesn't mean that anybody's going to find it. And so there's so many nuances and variables to find success, even within soil systems, that in hindsight I would never have thought of. Just because I understood my isopods a little bit better than anybody else, that didn't mean that anybody was going to trust in what we were doing, until we eventually got to where we had a lot of reviews, we had a lot of exposure at all of these expos. And so putting in the work with your cannabis seeds, your cannabis products, or if you're just building soil systems or finding success within that realm, I think that going to expos and seeing people is now the new way to do things, where COVID kind of changed that for a while. People enjoy the interactions again. So taking it to the next level, having certain ones that can't breed, if you're able to breed them, then obviously you're kind of the king of the castle. You get to charge a certain price point, at least for a while. And that's kind of how, a lot of us know that cannabis cuts or cannabis seeds work that way. There's hype behind those. There's hype behind designer isopods as well. So these are the lemon blues. If you're able to get your hands on these and get them to breed, well, guess what? You're doing something that most people can't. And so there's so much opportunity for people that are able to understand and build healthy soil systems, especially when you focus on that these are more of a crustacean than a bug. Getting these to breed, all of a sudden you're able to find monetary success with just a few shoeboxes full of fancy isopods. Another one of those that are highly sought after, I personally like these as well. I don't even think the picture does it justice. They're just brighter in person, but are the amber cubaras. So all of these cubara species, most of them are coming from Vietnam or Thailand. And they're continuing to find newer species as the years go by. So I don't even think we've barely scratched the surface of how many beautiful isopods there are, especially in some of the more like tropical cave type locations around the world. And then the other one that became almost as famous, I would say, as the rubber ducky is something called the cappuccino. This cappuccino made waves because of the way that it looks. Again, pictures never do these things justice, but the shimmer and the shine that it has going down kind of looked like a more of like an espresso when the people do the fancy froth aspect to it. So shout out to whoever found these, man, because these were extremely popular for a while. And as we continue to kind of move into the designer aspects, why do we need bougier and bougier, healthier soils that don't have fungus gnats and thrips and whiteflies? Is because we need to find success with even the tiniest versions of the macro world. And now it's become these bougie type springtails. So there's red ones, there's orange ones, there's blue ones, there's yellow ones, there's silver ones, there's ones that look spiky. Again, this is kind of a new frontier for all of these things. A lot of the like the red ones and the orange ones, they actually thrive on soil. But if you go online and you research a lot of this stuff, it's going to say to put them on clay. So there's so much misinformation that I think that people that are willing to sit down and for a week study soil systems, listen from some of the brighter minds in the space, you guys are going to be able to eventually find your own niche by being able to build up whatever you're trying to do, because you understand that just because somebody says something on the internet doesn't necessarily mean that it's gospel. And for whatever reason, in the early days of cannabis and now in the early days of reptiles, people don't fact check anything. It's just an echo chamber. And that's why they're feeding them fish flakes and constantly asking me why they have fungus gnats. When it comes, again, when I was talking about just finding success and starting to see that you can build out your own business, it's a confidence booster. And as the months go by and eventually the years go by, monetary isn't necessarily your only focus in life. And it's such a rewarding feeling to feel that way, that now you get to have more free time. And so I also want to give that to the community, because in the early days of cannabis, especially on the commercial side of things, some of you guys were expected to work 12-hour days, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 7 days a week. A famous quote was always, the plants don't know it's Christmas. Plants don't know it's Thanksgiving. So you need to be there because that's how things work. Well, even if you're making a decent salary, that's going to be very hard on the psyche of you as a human being. And being a cannabis farmer, I felt like, or just being in cannabis in general, you're kind of more of on the outskirts of stuff, or on the fringes, especially if you've been doing this your whole life and you're a little bit older. So the time is what you see is starting to become more valuable. And if I'm able to now give this to you guys, where you can wake up each and every day and get to pick your day. That's the best part about my life right now, is being an entrepreneur, waking up and getting to do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it. And so I wanted to kind of finish today's talk with a special picture of me teaching the same kind of stuff to these children. It's a school where you have to test to get in. So there's some of the best and brightest of our little town here in Colorado. And they were building their own bioactive vivariums and terrariums and understanding what it actually takes to have, you need the springtails, you need the composting worms to break down organic matter, or otherwise it's just going to sit there, it's going to dry up. All of these kids understood that kind of stuff. And so this is obviously the future generation. They're starting to play around with microscopes. And I was just excited to be a part of it. I was asked to come and give a talk. You guys can see that I got a little avocado growing in that pot. I've probably had that pot for 15 years or so. And I've been able to use it over and over and over and over and over again. So the fact that minimal investment, especially at the beginning, this is a small version of the worm bin that I would have at my house. Usually I would have at least a 25-gallon size, just to have, again, with the stomach analogy, I want it as big as possible because I'm constantly using those composting worms. and I'm showing them on a microcosm scale the same kind of thing. I was able to give them all a tablespoon of the soil within there when I was leaving, so that they could spread it into their vivariums, and everybody had life. So again, this is something that I think once you find success, you're then able to give back. It becomes more rewarding. I think you then find even more success for whatever reason, because you have more time to kind of sit around and think about things and be creative. And so I wanted to also give that as a kind of receipt for you guys to think about, do I really want to put in a few years to understand living soils from A to Z? And in hindsight, I hope that you guys see that I would do it all again. All of the bullshit and the drama, dealing with cannabis people for years, the egos and the emotional stuff that comes with dealing with some of that stuff. All of that goes away when you just become an entrepreneur. You're self-funded. You get to do your own thing, and that's the gift that I want to give to you guys. And then moving forward, have fun with it. I grew up. I always kind of said in the gutter, in the hood. Um, it never really worked out for me. I never really saw anything other than doing things that were kind of more in the gray market and finding ways to take from others, because I never thought that there was enough. And the reality is that once you start to build things up, America is a huge place. And there's no way that you would even be able to fulfill all of the orders sometimes if you're a family owned business. So that goal is to eventually get 3 orders a day, 5 orders a day, 10 orders a day. And once you get to that point, again, you get that free time. And so growing up on sugar water and mayonnaise sandwiches, that's what this little logo here represents. For me, it felt very fitting, because it's very hard to be able to change your own stars when you don't have any money. And in the cannabis space, lots of the suits that I like to call them, they know that and they prey on that. And so they realize how intelligent a lot of this community is, and they step on each other's, or they almost make us step on each other's necks by stepping on someone's neck, and kind of seeing what certain people in the industry are made of. And most people would never have the guts to walk away and do their own thing. And so, for anybody that's sitting here watching this today, I hope that not only are you thinking about learning and building up this, but if you've never thought about becoming an entrepreneur and doing your own thing, I wanted to give you that spark as well, because there's nothing better in life than having the free time to give back, to teach. Whether I'm teaching children or teaching you guys today, I wouldn't be able to have the free time if I wouldn't have taken some of the risks in the early days. And so, if you don't understand some of the things you're learning, just continue to run down that rabbit hole, and eventually I think things make sense for you. I appreciate everybody that's been listening to me, especially over the years on the podcast. And I'm just excited to finish out the year, twice now with Mr. Powers, our future, our soil, being a part of the community. Feed the soil, not the plant. This is something special, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Until I see you guys next time.
Last, but certainly not least, is this next video from Kevin at Okcalyxx. And it is an amazing video talking about doing natural farming your way. Taking a step back, having a mindset of using everything that your surroundings provide. We all have different climates and regions that we live in. That's one of the amazing things about the world, but also this country, is that we have so many different zones, so many different areas that provide different trees and different shrubberies and different seasons. So understanding your surroundings, but applying those same underlying natural farming principles to the whole situation and getting the most out of what you have, to be able to close your loops, to be able to diminish your costs, and to be able to lessen your carbon footprint, which is really what this is all about. So I hope you guys enjoy this next video. It's the last video of the night, and and we will see you afterwards.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin. I am Okcalyxx on social medias, Instagram, all that stuff. Okcalyxx Organics right here. That is my business that many of you all will know me from. I also own another business called B7 Athletics. It's a tumbling business. I was a gymnast back in the days. My daughter's a gymnast right now, level 9. But those are just kind of some of the things that I do. Today, I'm going to have a short speech on natural farming my way, and you could even say natural farming your way. The idea is that you're going to learn that you get to break rules, and you get to be creative and inventive, and you get to have confidence to move forward and mess up and learn how to do all those inputs. Some of y'all are brand new, some of y'all are way past me. But I want to give you a perspective or a mentality to have that is healthy and beneficial to you. And then I also want to give you some encouragement to be creative when you start to natural farm your way. I want to tell you a little bit about me, and then I'll get into the lecture. But like I said, as I was a gymnast back in the day, I got injured. I got onto some pain pills. I got basically addicted to pain pills, using alcohol, and I was trying to deal with my brain, and my brain got really toxic, and I didn't know how to think correctly anymore. And I got really mentally unhealthy, and I got depressed and had lots of anxiety. And I hadn't really been there in my life, but my early 40s, it really hit hard. Um, I was, let's see, went to college at NSU in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and then I went on to seminary to get my master's at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and then also got my doctorate. And in my doctorate work, there was a mentality that I captured that I take into my organics, and that's the mentality I want to actually help you understand, and I'll speak more of that. Um, got my doctorate. I studied at Oxford. I've studied overseas. I've done lots of just intense training on a lot of biblical topics, historical topics, and things like that. So a lot of things that I talk about will have a kind of maybe a spiritual slant to it. It teaches you, and it's good to use analogies to help us understand things about life. And so, and then I also want to tell you, my family used to own a fruit market in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, the Burgess Fruit Market. And when I was little, man, we'd go there and we'd love it. The smell of fermented fruit was there. It was always cool and damp in the fruit area, and I loved it. And I worked at the fruit market in college, baling hay, getting fruit, loading fruit, selling things, and so I've always been around farming. I've always had a garden, and I've not always been organic like this organic. I always loved to garden, but I never was like, I can remake my stuff. I think I can do this with ultra low cost, grow my own food, my own medicine. So it's a little bit about me, and some of that stuff does apply to the talk that I'm going to give. But natural farming my way is kind of about breaking the rules a little bit. Some of y'all may know Jordan Peterson. He once said, when I was listening to him, he's like, follow the rules, just don't follow stupid rules. And I was like, exactly. That's my mentality. But side note, I have always said I'm a methodological grower. I want methods. I don't want measurements. I don't want science. I mean, it's not bad or anything. It's just my brain structure. I am more happy whenever I am following a method and just getting out there and say, let's do this and this and this, and not measure things and weigh things and how much of this and how much of that. I just like to be, yeah, some of that, mix it all together. And that method I know works because it's always works. And I'll show you some pictures of my garden here pretty soon. But when I first started growing cannabis, I had I needed lots of soil because I wanted to grow big plants and I had big bags. And after about 2 years of growing, I began to realize with my 5 kids that I have, I can't be spending money on soil anymore. Something's got to give. And when the time comes down to the groceries being bought or the soil being bought, every time the groceries are going to get bought. And so I'm thinking, instead of buying soil, how can I make soil? How can I scrape some up? How can I reuse somebody else's soil even? I did that. I took some of my friends' soil before. But I don't want to spend money because I can't. And so I had to become creative. And I started composting and started learning IMO3s and all these things. But I started figuring out ways of, oh, I can do this my own way. I can figure out how to make my own soil, my own nutrients, started breeding my own seeds, not just cannabis, but vegetable seeds, sunflower seeds, and just really started getting into doing it my way. So natural farming your way, you're going to learn to create in the context of your environment. You're going to learn to create inputs based on what your environment allows you to do. And I'll get into this more. These are just some little pointers I want to throw at you, but we're going to learn to create within your own environment, not having to go out to stores to buy it, but learn to look in your own environment, find what will work, and then creating what you need with those things. You know, organic methods are often simply putting sexy terms to things that are naturally obvious. You know, we'll call it IMO3. And it's not like that's a sexy term, but it's just a term that we call this substance of material that is in a certain stage of inoculation, I guess you could say it that way. But, you know, I can go out into the woods and I can find IMO3. It's already made. Mother Nature does it. You know, when we make IMO3, we're using Mother Nature's processes. So I was learning to create this stuff on my own, and I was realizing, oh, just because it's called JLF, Jadam Liquid Fertilizer, doesn't mean that it's not just a bunch of green manure thrown in a bucket with water also. And so there were sexy terms put to things that are just naturally obvious, right? And so it's kind of trying to see past some of the smoke and mirrors of you have to follow these rules to get to this end product. And I realized I don't really have to follow those rules. I can actually skip rules. I can do it a little bit differently, you know. So organic methods are often putting sexy terms to things that are naturally obvious. You know, another thing I want to tell you before I get into this, don't let taboos and organic methods stop you from experimenting with your environment. Don't let organic taboos stop you from experimenting. IMO1, just take that as an example. You can set cooked rice out in the woods and you're going to gather IMO, indigenous microorganisms. Some will say only keep the IMO1 if there's fluffy clouds, right? White fluffy clouds all over, all over the rice. That's kind of a KNF method. Jadam method, if you look in the Jadam book, they've got a picture at the beginning of one of the chapters that has the rice and it's just covered in colors. And it just says, we don't know much about microbiology, so just use everything. Was like, oh, okay. Well, that was kind of polar opposites from really two sources of organic teaching that are really close. You know, I mean, KNF and then on into Jadam, they have their differences, but they have their similarities. But I just began to learn, like, okay, they're just names to these things, and like, if one person says, yeah, don't use that, that's not the way to do it, I'm going to probably find somebody else that says, you know what, you probably can use it. So don't let the taboo stop you. You know, and as I teach my kids in tumbling, correction is good. And correction can do good. But encouragement can do a lot more. And my point is this, when we follow rules of, you know, making EM5 or OHN, you know, lots of little steps that you follow. When we're following the rules and we don't do it right and someone says, no, you're supposed to do it this way, you're like, oh, okay, I can fix it. I can fix that. And then if you mess up again and all you get is correction, you're like, okay, I can fix that. And then you mess up again and all you get is correction. After a while, you're like, man, I've been trying my hardest and you have given me nothing but, you know, just do this, do it better. It will get me so far, but encouragement, it can do a lot more, and encouragement can get me a lot further. And so my idea, my method of natural farming, my way, is getting out there, messing up, trying new things, and having a guy like me come along and say, dude, good job. That is fantastic. I love your effort. I love the knowledge that you've shared with us, whether win or lose. Now we have that knowledge in common. I appreciate that. That person is going to keep on trying harder and harder for that reward of somebody being pleased with what they did. So following the rules of KNF or other input making, don't get discouraged. Try something different, mix it up. You get to do that, man. So be encouraged. That's what I want you to have. Now, I talked about Jadam and KNF in my search of trying to figure out, where did all these inputs and methods begin? When you start learning about all these things, you get into KNF and Jadam, and you learn that the creators of those two things went to Japan to learn farming methods. If you read other books about old 40 centuries of farming, I think is the name of a book that was really good. You learn how the Japanese took a lot of Chinese methods in farming. And so as I was reading and studying all this stuff, I'm just like, man, they're doing stuff. Sorry, back up. People are going to other people and saying, how do you do this? And they show them methods. And then they take those methods back to their area and they kind of morph those methods to fit their environment. And then they say, KNF, Korean natural farming. And so to bring those methods over here to America, it's not KNF, it'd be American natural farming at a minimum, because we're in an American environment and an American setting, if you understand what I'm saying. Remember, guys, I can't exhaust everything I have to say. I can't defend everything that I'm throwing out in 40 minutes, or less. So bear with me. I know there's arguments to each side, but knowing that these farming methods were simply being passed down to different cultures, and different cultures were keeping the things that work for their environment, and then creating these methods and giving them step-by-step processes so that other people can learn them. Dude, that was awesome. But when it came to my environment and my backyard, I didn't need to do a lot of the inputs. I didn't need to make a lot of the inputs, nor could I make a lot of the inputs, because my environment didn't offer me things. So I had to become creative. I had to learn, what could I use? What could I substitute? Look at Mother Nature, what she was doing out in the woods too. I was watching her, and the seasons go by, just understanding things are falling on the ground. Nothing's being turned. I never turn my compost anymore because I started watching nature. It just falls on top and packs in, and all this is a protective layer for all the microbiology under here. And so watching nature, I was like, man, nature takes a long time, but if I can recreate those conditions, I can do what she's doing, and I can do it faster than she can. And so I just learned to be like, okay, I'm breaking rules, y'all. I'm breaking rules. I'm not following all the steps. I'm going to just go out there, and I'm going to take that doctoral mentality that I mentioned earlier into my organics. Now, so I want to get into the lecture now. I want to get into natural farming my way. We're going to get into this mindset of attacking your organic gardening. All right. So, I told you that I got my doctorate, and I brought my doctoral thesis out right here. This big baby, boom, big fat girl. That took me about 7 years to do. I'm very proud of it. It changed my life. I don't work for a church or anything like that. I just loved learning, and I went really far into seminary. But when I started the doctoral process, it was something that I was fully unaware of. I did not know how to do a doctoral thesis, put on a project, write the chapters. I was totally unaware. It was very similar to when I started organics back in around 2018, 2020. Completely absent-minded of any knowledge of KNF. And I remember thinking, okay, so KNF, Jadam, these are like the ultimate organic styles. That was my mindset then. But I was unaware of how to make an input. I was unaware how to make bokashi. I was unaware of how to make a JMS. I've heard all these things, but I was fully unaware. And I felt like I needed other people's help, and I needed steps, and I needed direction, and I needed somebody to say, good job, you're doing it right. And it was just, it was very similar. Going into the doctoral work, it was like, I don't know anything. I need to look at other doctoral works and see what their chapter 1 looked like and what their titles look like, and try to do some type of imitation just to take a step forward, right? And the first chapter of this thing it took me about 2.5 years to finish. Very detailed, a lot of statistics and things like that. And when I thought I had got my chapter 1 ready to be turned into my doctoral readers and for it to be read, I sent it in, they read it, and when I got my email back, there was a few things that were said, but then at the end it said, "This is far from doctoral work. Please try again." And I was shattered. I was shattered, dude. I was like, dude, they got to be like, this is pretty good. Because I'm a dude that rides encouragement. If you encourage me a little bit, I will go 10,000 times harder. That's how I am. So I'm a big encourager also. But my hopes and dreams were crushed after the doctoral thesis, chapter 1, didn't make it through. And when they said, "This isn't doctoral work, please try again," I was like, dude, I did it just like, a couple of books I was looking at, a couple of theses I looked at. I mean, I basically imitated. I didn't copy anything, copyright anything or plagiarize anything, but their form, the structure, I just followed it, but the information was all mine. And I'm like, how in the world is this not doctoral work? And I don't know how to move forward anymore. I'm stuck. I tried to follow and imitate other people's ways, and it didn't work for me. And I'm stuck now. I don't know what to do. And it was the same feeling in organics. I could get so far, but then I'm like, somebody's got to show me something. I can't just look at a YouTube page and look at somebody's dog they want to talk about and then talk about the OHN and then look at their farm. Like, dude, you got to get into it and you got to tell me what I need to know because I can't just wander around. You got to get specific with me. And that's how I felt in the doctoral world. And I felt like that in organics. But what happened in the doctoral work is this. I had a meeting, with Dr. Branch, great human being. And he began to explain to me why it wasn't doctoral work. And I was going in wanting answers and I was wanting direction. And I ended up walking out a new man, basically is what happened. And I know it's taking a while to get here, guys, but here's the mindset really that I take into organics that I got from this project. Dr. Branch said, "We want what you have to offer." He would say that looking at other people's work is good, but it can trap you. It can lock you into their ways and their methods, and what their project was and is nothing about yours. And so I didn't copy. It's just my style wasn't in there. My style, my effect, right? My feel wasn't in chapter 1, and they could tell already. They wanted some more of me into it. The thing that was frustrating was I was trying to do it like others, but I wasn't getting the same results from my readers. I was following everybody else, right? You hear what I'm saying? I was following in organics also. I was following everybody else doing what they were doing, and I could only get so far, and it just wasn't me. It wasn't my style. Man, it got a little frustrating, but what it came down to is this: the idea is that this project only I can make. It has to be from me totally. And the more it's from me, the more valuable it is. That's the idea. Because whenever you create something and it was all from your knowledge and your method and maybe accidents or whatever, however this thing came about, it was all from you, and the feel and the flavor is all from you, and no one knows anything about it, so they have to ask you everything. That's valuable. That creativity that you offered to organics, or put it back into the academic world, the creativity, the thing that I created here and all the knowledge that it brought together, it's valuable because no one else has done it before. And people can read and get all this new information that you have offered to the academy. And in the organic world, it's the same way. When you create new things, you have furthered the organic academy, if you will, and we're all a little bit better because of the knowledge you brought. And so imitating somebody else's project over and over and over again, fine, but it doesn't progress our organic academy in that sense, And so when I left that, I was like, oh, my mind was blown. And it was like all the chains had come off of me. And it was just like, you want me? Okay, you're gonna get every bit of me. And that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to get into it and get my feeling behind why I'm writing these things. What was I feeling when people were talking to me about all these issues? They wanted to hear that in that doctoral thesis. And so, you know, organics, organics are more fun when they're from you. When you've created something new that your environment, and I don't mean brand new, I just maybe mean a little different. Okay, so what I want to talk about was the form and the function that I wrote down. Form and function, I learned this in seminary. It's about baptism. You know, some of you are Catholics. You might have been baptized by sprinkling on top of your head. If you're a Baptist, boom, you better get all the way into that water. So we have two totally different forms of what we might say have the same function. You know, so baptism represents dying, coming back to life like Jesus did. But the form of it is completely different. And this was something also was like, this is good for organics, form and function of organics. Your environment creates the form, right? The function is the same thing in the end, but your environment creates your form. Let me give you an example, like an IMO3. If you have lots and lots of acorns, you can make an acorn IMO3. That's your form. If somebody makes pecan IMO3, that's his form. The function's the same, guys. The function's the same. That stuff is going to turn back to soil pretty soon. And that stuff is going to house microbiology and give it food. And it's going to do the same thing, although the form is different. And so your form begins to be developed within your own environment. If you're not looking at other people, but you're looking at your own environment and saying, okay, what can I use in place of other things? Then your form starts to take place. Your organics begin to become creative. And then you begin to also offer offer information to the Organic Academy, if you will. This was something that I was like, oh, this is perfect. I put an apple in my compost one day, and within about 12 hours or so, I pulled it out because I want to see how fast those black soldier flies would eat it. And it came out still in the shape of an apple. And I was like, oh, this is awesome, man. And so anyway, I had that made as my logo, right? That is my Okcalyxx Organics logo right there. And it is all me. There's no one else that's got that. You know what I'm saying? And that mindset of I want what's from you and you only, and that's it. That mindset is pictured in this picture right here. Like, dude, I crushed it. This is so unique and so fun. It was straight out of my compost, had my fingers holding it up, and I freaking just love it. But that's the mentality, man. Being creative, uh, giving, making your inputs or making your organics or your labels or your pictures, whatever, making them all straight from you. So that was a great picture. I loved it. Let me move on. So, sorry, I'm going to back up here. So, the mindset again is you get to mess up. Yep, you get to mess up. You can create new things. They can, look awful or not what you wanted, and you can start all over. You get to mess up, right? We want everything to come from you. So if you aren't following the rules, well, don't worry about it. Let's see what happens, man. You might make something awesome. But what happens eventually, and what happened with Okcalyxx Organics is that passion to just do it your own way. It created Okcalyxx Organics, and I love that passion so much that I always tell people when I'm teaching classes, I tell people this mentality. I want it from you. Go create your own thing. Name it. Show us if it works or if it didn't. And we move on. So there was a quote real quick before I move into the second part of being creative. It's the lady named Susan Jeffries. She said, I want you to take the like me sticker off your forehead and place it on the mirror where it belongs. I was like, ooh, I like that. Yeah, because a lot of times it's like, I don't know if I should make this because, maybe people will say something or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm wearing that sticker on me. I take that sticker and put it, boom, right there on the mirror. And every time I look at that man, say, I want you to like it. That's the mentality I want, because that's when the passion shines through also, man. When it's you that's pleasing yourself and you're in love with what you're doing, people buy your passion. They typically don't buy your product. They buy your passion and belief in you and what you're doing. And they say, dang, that guy's got it on fire. But it's that mentality, guys, of I don't have to follow all the rules. I can be creative and I can do it my way. I can natural farm my way. And I don't have to worry about what other people say because I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. I want to create something from me and offer it to the Organic Academy. Okay, so that's the mindset. I'm getting close to being done. Let's get into, okay, so I'm going to walk out of my backyard and Okcalyxx said, I'm going to do it my way, man. Here I go. What do you do? Well, I want to give you some ideas of how I was creative and how I kind of used my environment to make things. First thing I started doing, guys, was composting my own food. If I want to be creative and I don't want to buy soil, right? I don't want to buy my own bags of soil. Here it was Fox Farm back in when 2018, when cannabis became legal. It was Fox Farms. Woo! Bought a bunch of that stuff. But then I was like, dude, I got to compost. And if I can compost enough, I could grow straight out of compost. And believe it or not, I started compost enough that for 2 years, I did grow straight out of compost. But then I started getting into the IMO 3s and the IMO 4s and learning things like that. Let me get back out real quick. But I started composting. And when I learned IMO 3, I was like, ooh, combining these two textures together creates a great soil. And then I learned later, like IMO 4 is kind of that idea. And I was like, holy cow, dude, we're creating things already. And again, those sexy names are on everything, but they naturally just start to happen when you start messing with stuff. You don't have to think up new things, right? I don't want you to get like, okay, he's telling me to make new things. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying be original, be creative, use substitutes, do different methods, try different temperatures, different lengths of time. Be creative all that you want. The saying is necessity is the mother of invention, and that's exactly what it was with me. I necessarily had to have more soil to grow bigger plants, and I could not spend money on it. So I had to, out of necessity, create my own soil. When I learned about started composting and I learned about IMO 3, I began to realize I can go out into the woods. I live with a bunch of woods over here. I can go out into the woods and start getting all these materials. And not only that, but when I roll these logs back and I'm scraping up this dark, good looking soil, I'm like, I can grow out of this. And so I started just going out into the woods and scooping up all those kinds of soils and textures or creating textures with it. And I started growing in those things. And basically it's an IMO 4 is what I would call it that I grow out of right now. But it wasn't like I was trying to make it in totes or in piles. I was going out into the woods and finding things that already worked. Finding Mother Nature's IMO 3, Mother Nature's IMO 4. I didn't have to make anything. I cheated the process, right? Broke the rules. I just looked at the IMO 3 and was like, that's what it looks like. Then I went out into the woods and said, that's what it looks like. And just started gathering it up. And so, my point is, I didn't cook the IMO 3 like the rules said. I found it out in nature. Mother Nature already did the cooking. So you don't have to follow all the rules sometimes, right? It can be done your way. And the ultimate tale of it all is that garden that you saw the pictures of that looks so good and those big cannabis plants. That's the ultimate tell that your methods are working. But I promise you, it'll certainly work. And the one thing about organics is this: the flex in organics is this, that you're not doing much and everything looks great. Yeah, that's the organic flex. Is once you've learned to be like, man, I really don't have to do a whole lot. Like I could make inputs all day long, but really, I don't have to do all that stuff. There's really not much I got to do. Good soil, right? Good sunny spot, a little water. We're ready to rock and roll. So another thing is this: going outdoors and being creative. Composting was one, learning about IMO 3 and then going out and finding it in the woods. That was another thing. Let's see. Another thing is this: besides composting your personal waste, your neighbors have lots of stuff, guys. Let me get my picture screen back up here. This is my neighbor's tree. That is a oak tree that puts off so many acorns that I realized I don't have to go out and gather acorns anymore. I just got to go over to my neighbor's house and ask if I can rake up his acorns. And guys, we'll rake up 8 totes of acorns from that one tree. And so again, your neighbors have the ability to supply you with some things that you might not have to go out and buy. Your neighbor's leaves right now, as I was driving through our neighborhood, I counted about 9 bags of leaves sitting out by the trash. Man, I used to take those all the time, but I don't need a lot of leaves and I don't like them that much. I like grass, but back in the day, I would have taken every bit of that, man. Um, we've got another place you could go to, our parks, right? You can go to parks. There's a park here that has tons of magnolia trees, hickory trees, oak trees. You could go to churches, schools. Let me get out of this real quick, guys. You go to churches. Churches have pine trees all the time. Schools have beautiful decorative trees. Going out to places like this is the point is, like, if you live in an apartment or you don't have woods around you, there are places to go to find these things where you can bring them back, crack them down, process them down, and it will eventually turn into good soil. But that's just being creative, right? That's going out and saying, I don't have to buy my own soil. I can be creative and make my own soil. I don't even have woods. I can still be creative. I can do this my way. I can go out to the park, to the churches, to the schools, scraping up stuff, go to my neighbor's house, getting all of their extras and bringing it back and not spending money. And eventually, again, that's that form. We gathered all these things and we process it down, and the function is always the same. It turns into great soil for you. Another thing, guys, that I would go do is along the roads when cities mow their yard, mow their streets or mow their highways, I would rake up big piles of that mowed grass. I'd take it home. I love mowed grass. I go to dumpsters. I go to fruit market dumpsters. I have a friend who has a mowing company called Clean Clippings. He brings me by his mowed grass so that he doesn't have to take it to a dump and pay for it to be processed down. So lots of creative ideas, lots of things that you can do to not spend any money, to do it your way. Again, to ultra low cost is the idea. Eventually, my garden, I'm to a spot where I just don't spend any money. It's all just extra recycled stuff. But it takes work to get there. But on that way of getting there, man, being creative, not spending money, that's your goal, dude. That's just a great mindset to have. Let me show you some other things that my environment allows me to use. Horsetail. So there's a creek behind my house. And I can go, this is some type of horsetail. It doesn't have that big bushy thing, but I know some people have told me the exact kind, but this horsetail has great silica. I also have a large bamboo grow about a mile from my house that I go to often and use it. But horsetail, I use it to make horsetail fermented plant extract high in silica. Good stuff. Now I don't have to buy any kind of silica, anything like that. I've got it. Another thing I have all around me is turkey tail. And in the woods all around me are inoculated with turkey tails. So often what I do is I'll grab turkey tails like this and the wood that's all around it, process all that down, make a beautiful turkey tail IMO3. I've made fermented turkey tail extracts before. I've used turkey tail as an addition to an OHN recipe. And by the way, Chris Trump was on our show just a few weeks ago. He said the one thing he would not change is the OHN process. And then I also heard him on Shaping Fire just yesterday say that he said, if you do IPMO, he said, do it the way I've told you to. It's the best way. So here's the whole point of that. That IPMO was his own beautiful creation. You should hear the story of how it happened. But then once it was created, he's like, this is the best way to do it. If you follow these rules, it works. So sometimes it's like, yeah, this dude created it. It was all from him, but he's saying, I created it, and I'm telling you, this is the best way. Sometimes it's good to listen to those rules. Again, I'm not saying don't follow the rules, don't follow stupid rules. That's what I'm saying. So Turkey Tail IMO3 was something that I created. And again, I created it and sold it. I put it online and sold it to people. I mean, these are beautiful turkey tails. Get those spores in your garden. Look at that beautiful log, turkey tails all over it. But these are things that I go out and I use to create my own soil, right? I go out there and find that stuff. Another thing, my neighbor's chicken poo, rabbit poo. I will go and clean their chicken pens for them. Go do a little hard work. Boom, got tons of high nitrogen manure. Make IMO5. Put it in my gardens in the fall, and stuff like that. Going to Starbucks, getting coffee grounds, bringing it back, fermenting it, bokashi style. I called it Bo Coffee. How creative, right? Lots of fun. Lots of fun for me. Maybe people don't think it's fun or whatever. I thought it was awesome, and it makes me happy as a human being. And that's that good mental health stuff. Another thing that I created, if you will, integrated IMO2. That's where I would ask like people like Marco is Growing, the Soil Guru, Candy Natural Farming, Neverwinter Farms. I asked these guys to send me their IMO3. They sent me IMO3. I took IMO1 from the IMO3, mixed all that IMO1 together, made IMO2 out of it, and that was an integrated IMO2. So I took lots of different growers, IMO3 and their microbiology, and I integrated it all into one thing. I thought it was a cool idea. And I still do that to this day. I love taking IMO1s from different people's stuff. And I actually send out a little card in my boxes typically saying, when you dump this IMO3 bag out, put some cooked rice in the bag, let it sit for 4 days. When you take it out, you'll have my IMO1 all over it, right? So great, fun, creative, imaginative ideas, all done with an attitude of, I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to have fun with this. And the more it's from me and the more creative, the more the things I can find out, the more I have to offer to the Organic Academy. Again, just like Chris Trump's IPMO. Holy moly, that is such a cool idea, right? And it's from him, it's from his experience, and he now can just teach us everything about it. And how much further did he advance all of us in this organic world just by coming up with something cool like that? Guys, my time is about done. Let me look and see if I need to tell you anything else. And I don't think I do. Natural farming your way. Have the mentality of, if I can create it and I can get all in it, learn every aspect of it, I become so much, or I have something that is so valuable that I can give to other people. That's that mindset. You don't have to always follow the rules. And then when you learn that you don't have to follow all the rules and you don't have to be like everybody else, you can become free to create what you want. Then your passion just starts to explode, guys. Anyway, that's what happened to me. So I want to thank Matt Powers. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Matt, for letting me talk. It was a wonderful time. Thank you guys for listening to the talk. I can't wait to get on the panel. I think we're gonna do some panel discussions and fun things like that. Go watch all the videos, guys. This is such a fantastic conference. Love you all. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your minds.
All right. So that finishes out this tri-video pre-recorded holiday special from Bioactive Live Q&A. And I hope that you guys really got some good information out of this from the three fellas that helped contribute to this show. And the show wouldn't be possible without Bryan from Rubber Ducky Isopods. Make sure you give him a follow at Rubber Ducky Isopods on Instagram. And check him out at rubberduckyisopods.com, terrariumtribe.com. And also Kevin from Okcalyxx. Make sure you give him a follow at Okcalyxx on Instagram. Check him out at okcalyxshop.com. He's got some amazing nature-driven products, some indigenous microorganisms that he's harvested from some great stuff in his area. And you can always support us as well. My name is Mark, and from MIBeneficials.com. And as the holiday season kind of comes into full swing here, and as we start to feel that warmth in our heart, we really wanted to take a moment to stop and thank every one of you guys for tuning in, sharing your time, sharing your mind, helping us expand this program. Fielding your questions is really what helps us grow. And without that element, without the Q&A, the live Q&A aspect of this thing, I really don't think that this would be as special as it is. And so your support means the world to us, and we really wouldn't be here without you guys. Whether you're celebrating with family, friends, or finding a moment of peace for yourself, we hope that you remember that there's other soil nerds out there, and that the things that you're talking about at the table that you find interesting may not be interesting to the in-laws. They might not even be interesting to your own family. But we love you. And we hope that your days are filled with love, laughter, and a little bit of magic. And remember, spread that kindness, cherish the small moments, and look forward to all of the things that 2025 have to bring. From all of us here at Bioactive Live Q&A, we wish you guys a happy holidays, joyful new year, and we cannot wait to connect with you on the next episode here. Until that happens, stay connected and stay inspired.